For tonight's show, we're going to welcome Jody Cook back on. If you'll remember, Jody joined us for episode 46. Jody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for coming back.
Hey, Vic, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm so glad to have the chance to bring you back. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that. Got a lot of good information, feedback from people from the last show, so I was really happy about that. Yeah.
Oh, I'm not surprised. You did such a great job. What have you been up to since that show that we did?
Oh, God. I've done a couple conventions back to back for a while. Been working on a new book called Ohio Dog Man, Encounters with the Black Dog. It's basically dealing with strictly all Ohio stuff. Got a lot of new information I'm putting in there. I'm taking some of the information I have in my new Dog Man book and putting it in there. Another thing I've been working on also is, I think I talked to you about this in the past, about doing some type of Dog Man magazine, and I decided to go with a newsletter, a monthly or a bi-monthly newsletter, because I think that would be a lot better to go with, to be full color, a lot of new reports that people are getting, new information, out there about books and movies and things like that, dealing in the subject, interviews. And I think that would be a lot better to do, and I think people would, be very interested, because it would be a lot cheaper in the long run to do something like that for people. And I think it'd be a good little collector piece too. So that's about it. Just, going on and doing investigations, talking to a lot of people. Actually, I've had MUFON ask me to join, because they're starting to get in to a lot of the cryptid stuff, because they're getting a lot of cryptid sightings and things along with their UFO sightings and stuff. So they contacted me and asked me if I'd be interested, and I think I'm going to do that. I know it's going to be a lot to do with all the other stuff I do, but I've done a lot of UFO investigations years and years ago, and I think it'd be neat to get a lot more information on Dogman sightings and things like that with MUFON.
It's funny how all this ties together. You wouldn't think at face value, if you're in MUFON and investigating UFO sightings, that you'd wind up with anything to do with cryptid sightings, but if you place yourself out in the middle of nowhere where a lot of these UFO sightings take place in the first place, I guess you are going to rub elbows with strange cryptids from time to time out there.
Right. There's quite a few UFO type sightings where the entities were dogs, some type of canine dog, which I find very interesting. I don't believe that the Dogman itself is a extraterrestrial entity. I think it's a flesh and blood canine type creature on its own. But who's to say that there's not some type of species out there that is canine, because we know of reptilian type entities in the UFO culture. So why not a dog? Because like you said, there's quite a few sightings that's taken place. There was actually one here in Ohio back in the 70s where the creature was actually, the way the guy described them was more of the 1940s version Wolfman, which I found very interesting. But he said they were very canine looking, but that's how he described them, was they looked more like the Wolfman from the 1940s movie. And this was back in the 70s. So there is a lot of sightings out there that deal with canines. So I think it'd be kind of interesting to look into that, because there's a big connection with the Skinwalker Ranch with MUFON, and they're supposed to have some pretty neat stuff out there.
Neat? I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting to say the least. If I'm out in the middle of nowhere, Jody, and I see a UFO come down and land, if a dog-manish looking being steps off of the ramp underneath that UFO, that's a little too much, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I would be more afraid I'm going to be eaten.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm lunch and stuff, so.
That's not a good scene whatsoever.
No, it's not. It's not, yeah.
Well, the listeners didn't tune in to hear us talk about UFOs or whatnot, so I probably should move on to the topic that they did tune in to hear us talk about. Since that last show, episode 46, you've been investigating some new sightings. Could you tell us about those?
Yeah, there was one sighting in central Ohio where a guy was going to put some trail cams up because up on his property, something was digging in, trying to get into the chicken coop and things like that. So he thought it was more coyote, or something like that, because they've been finding a lot of hybrid type coyotes in Ohio, and these coyotes are hybrid with wolves, and they're pretty big and they're pretty nasty. And so he was putting some trail cams up, and he was walking through this one area, and there was a lot of high grass that was off to his right. And he stopped, and he saw this large black dog laying in the grass. And the dog kind of looked over at him, and he said it stood up and snarled at him. He said this thing was probably about 7 feet. He said it just, how it was standing there, it was like its paws, this front paws, the hands were almost like curled like a fist almost. And I mean, big broad chest and everything. It had a tail, large snout, it had the high ears. The eyes were almost like a blackish red color. And he said it kind of like twisted its head a little bit while it was snarling. He started to back off. And after he said he didn't turn his back to it, but he kind of was backing off. And he said it just ran. I mean, just on 2 legs. Boom. I thought, man, that was awesome. I mean, the way this guy was telling me the story. So he went back, got a gun, and went back out there. He couldn't find anything, but he took pictures of the trail he went down, and he took pictures of where this thing was laying. And you can see where this thing was laying at. So that was a really incredible story. I mean, the guy he's in his early 20s and stuff, and he just couldn't comprehend what he saw. He was more scared and afraid for his family more than he was for his livestock. But he said he's got motion cameras out, not motion cameras, motion lights and things out there. And he said he stays up pretty late at night just watching this area. He says, I haven't said nothing to my wife and kids, but he goes, my wife knows that there's something there, and she hasn't really pressed him on what it is.
He makes a clean break, snatches up a gun, and heads back to that immediate area. I think that had a lot to do with the fact that he was 20 years old than anything. That doesn't sound like the wisest move when you don't know what you're dealing with.
I asked him, I said, well, why'd you go back by yourself with the gun? I wouldn't have done it. So I would have called a couple of my buddies up and we would have went out, because that, to me that was crazy. He said, the reason why I did that, because my family was going through my head. If I didn't stop this now, this thing may hurt my family. And he said that was my thinking. I was going to kill this thing. I was in protection mode. And I said, I can understand that, but you're still putting yourself at risk going out there. If there was more than one, I asked him, well, what did you take out there? And he had a single barrel shotgun. And I'm like, dude, I mean, but when you're young, and I was sitting there, I could really understand, because when I was his age, I did stupid things like that. I mean, you kind of have no fear. His children was 3, and 7 months. So I can understand him being scared and where he lived, and this thing being that close to his house. I can understand him doing what he did. I could never have done that. I'm older and I'm wiser.
Yeah, like you said, when you're that age, you think you're bulletproof, and also your judgment isn't what it's going to be later on in life, so got to cut the kid a break. But like you said, that was not the smartest
No, it
move.
wasn't the smartest thing. I asked him, do you possibly think it was a dog or a coyote or something like that? Do you think it was standing up on something that made it look like? He said, no, this thing stood up. I mean, literally was standing on 2 legs. And I asked him to describe it from head to toe. He definitely described this thing. It was definitely canine. He said the back legs were definitely like a dog. He described it very much like a husky type dog. This is the thing that got me and when he described, he said the cheeks on this thing were kind of puffed a little bit fur. And the only thing I can think of, and I was going back wondering what he was talking about, and I was looking at some pictures of wolves, and I understood what he was saying, how they have that puffy kind of cheek a little bit, where the hair kind of comes out, where it almost comes out into like a mane, where it starts at the neck. And he was describing it like that. They were kind of puffed out a little bit with the hair. The head was much bigger, he said, than a normal dog. But he said the hands were more like curled up in almost like a fist. So I don't know. It was an odd sighting, and he said this thing was big. He said it was solid black, very broad chest, very broad at the shoulders and stuff. But he said it was definitely 100% dog looking.
Yeah, sounds like a pretty typical dogman description. Did he ever mention anything about outward aggression that it displayed towards him?
Only thing he said was that it snarled at him. It showed his teeth. At one point, it cocked its head a little bit as he was doing it, but like you said, he was backing up the whole time. And I remember asking him, well, tell me a little bit more about the head. What was the head doing? He said, well, as I'm looking at it, as it's looking at me, the head kind of cocks to the left and comes outwards, like it's sticking its head out, snarling. That's odd. I said, what about, is there any other details that you noticed about the head? He said, no, that's really about it. And I, from my impression, I mean, with like my dog, who's a German Shepherd, when he shows aggression, his ears normally go back a little bit. And I didn't ask him about the ears. I figured I was wanting him to tell me. So I didn't say anything, but I really wanted to say, well, what about the ears? What about the ears? Because I figure if the ears changed or anything like that, he would have said something. So, like I said, that's a very interesting. I mean, the guy was pretty shaken up. I mean, he went through cigarette after cigarette after cigarette after cigarette through the interview. I mean, boom, one right after another. I mean, he was shaking when he was. This is one of your roebuck country boys. I mean, this dude, this kid was bigger than me. The ones that kind of like lift tractor motors and stuff. You know what I'm saying? The big old country boys, and it scared him. It really did, because he's never seen anything like that, never. And one thing I thought, well, maybe a bear. There is black bear up there, and I think everybody is smart enough to know a difference between a bear and a dog. That's the thing. When you're that close to it, the difference between a bear and a dog.
Especially someone like him who's spent all of his life out there.
Yeah, well, he's never seen a bear out there, because we talked about that, and he said, no, we never, we haven't any, I've never seen one. I've never seen the evidence of any bears. But the thing of it is, it's just, I'm just saying in general, most people know what a bear looks like, and they know what a dog looks like. It's the whole thing, the werewolf phenomenon. When you see something, you can recognize it. Even though you recognize it from movies, you recognize it from books. You're able to recognize it and identify it to what it is. And that thing that really reeks me about science, it's misidentification. No, because people can tell the difference. Because it's stuff like that so much in our culture that, when we see something, we can identify it what it is. So if it looks like a werewolf, it looks like a werewolf. It doesn't look like a bear, because we know what a bear looks like. Because we can comprehend that. But, that was one of the best sightings I had. There was another sighting in Germantown where a guy was going down the road, and he seen what he thought was a bear in this field. And so he goes to stop, and he's looking at this thing, and he's like, I'm amazed, man. I've never seen a bear before in my life other than a zoo, and he said this thing just starts gallivanting a little bit, and he sees it has a long tail, and he's like, man, that's a large coyote. I mean, he said, this thing is big. And he's watching this thing, and he says it's chasing something, a small rodent, in this field. And he said he ends up getting it, and he said this thing, it's like he takes its hands. He said the front paws. And he's holding this thing while he's eating it. It's something unique to him, but that's what he was saying, it was holding it and eating it. I mean, he realized after a point it wasn't a bear, because when it was sitting there at first, that's what he thought it was. But like you said, when it, started galloping off towards something, he was able to see the tail. And he knew it wasn't a bear. At that point, he thought it was a very large coyote. And then when it got what it's got, it's sitting there, and it's holding this and eating this thing. And he's sitting there watching this thing, and then he says it just kind of goes off. And I'm like, dude, I mean, why didn't you take a picture of it? You got a cell phone. Why did you not take a picture of this thing? And I was just in awe. He goes, I didn't even think about it. He said, this thing could have came up to me and ate me. And I mean, it was that much in awe just watching it. And I'm saying, well, how far was this thing from you? He estimated about 70, maybe 75 yards away.
That's still pretty close.
It's pretty close. I went to the location. I was at the site where he sat at, and it was close enough that you could identify what it is. And this thing, if it took a running charge to you, I think by the time you realized what was going on and got moving, I think it could have been up on you. And I can understand his point, what he was saying. But my thing is, I keep my cell phone always at camera mode whenever I'm on, in my car, because God knows what happens. I believe the guy. My thing is, dude, you had a camera. I would have been snapping pictures. But I guess everybody is different. When everybody sees something, and I can understand him too, because I've seen things where you just don't want to take your eyes off of it, because you want to try and get a better understanding of what you're looking at. And if you're afraid if you move to grab your phone or grab something, the thing's gone. And that I can understand. But I thought that was a very interesting sighting. Not as good as the first one, but that one I thought was pretty good, because I know in that particular area there is a lot of dogman sightings up there. Adam Davies, Adam did a Google Earth image of an area and got something on that in that same field, which I thought was really interesting, of a large dark creature 2 feet walking in this field. I mean, this thing's huge. It doesn't mean it's a dog man, but it's in this particular area where there've been a lot of sightings where actually I've gotten tracks out of, and Adam has gotten tracks and stuff out of that same area. It's real close where a lot of the kill sites are taking place. But what's so interesting now is that the DNR is I can't say confiscating, it's not the right word, but they're privatizing a lot of the land up in this area where the sightings are taking place. And they just recently done that. And, I find that very odd. And there's a lot of signs that they're posting up in that area, telling you can't go in there because it's a controlled area. And like I said, they're doing this in a lot of the areas where there's a lot of sightings taking place. And like I said, this is just recently, within the past couple months, they've started to do this.
The more I find out about that Germantown, Ohio area, the more strange it seems. It seems like there must be a big population of dogmen around there because of all of the sightings that take place around there.
It's not that big. I mean, that's the thing, but the thing about the area itself, the town is not that big, but there's a lot of rural and wooded area around there. But there's something about this particular town where a lot of the sightings are taking place. Now, my third one that I got out of there it wasn't so much of a sighting, but it was a vocalization that they got Like there was a guy out there sitting on his porch. He said he was able to hear something, moving the wood line by his house. He thought, well, a deer, because deers come out of the wood line, they go into his yard. He has a feeder there. And he said that he was hearing a growling sound and a howling sound. He said literally like a wolf howl coming from the wood line. And he said it was at one point that the growl was so loud, he said, I felt the vibration in my chest. And he says, I'm 30 yards from my porch to the wood line. And 30 yards is not far. Okay, but he has a big property. Okay, but particularly where he was at was closer to the wood line. And he said it was that loud, literally, he felt the vibration in his chest. Yeah, so, and he said it was definitely, and this is in Germantown also, and he's very aware of the stuff that takes place, in Germantown. And he said this was not the first time I've ever heard it. And actually, what's interesting is that it's the father of a guy who was at a conference that I was at, that I know very well, who lived in Germantown. And we started talking about it, and he goes, you need to talk to my dad. My dad can tell you some really interesting stuff about up there. And he goes, I want to take you out to an area up there that, the DNR has actually been trying to, intimate domain is what he was saying on this particular piece of area. And he says, this is where this thing is. He goes, I'm telling you, this is where this thing is. He says, because I know it's there because the DNR is pressing to try and get the land. And he said, there's nothing in this area worth having. I mean, meaning that there's no wild grass that's protected under law. There's no particular tree or owl or bees or whatever. You know what I'm saying? That the DNR would want protected. It's just a bunch of dead area, but they want it protected. And he said they've been fighting with the town to get this area protected. And he said a lot of that stuff's going on up there in Germantown. And it's a really odd place because everybody who you talk to from that area or who's from Dayton or Middletown, when you talk about the Germantown werewolf, everybody knows it. They got a story. They know somebody that saw something or they heard something or they seen something. Everybody knows something about that, except for the officials.
Is that what the locals refer to it as, the Germantown werewolf?
The Germantown werewolf, yeah. And here's the neat thing about it. The Dayton Daily News did about 4 articles on the Germantown werewolf. And as of today, you can look through all their archives going back 30 years, and you will not find one of those articles.
Really?
Yeah. I thought that was odd. Not even in microfiche, you cannot find those articles. Adam, I believe, has 4 articles that they did, but he and I talk a lot, and we talked about this. You can't even go up there and look for them anymore. You can't find them. They're just not there. I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I don't believe in a lot of stuff out of the ordinary, but if there's something that could be a possible threat to a community, I can see the law enforcement or the DNR kind of covering up for the fact is they just don't know how to deal with it. And I know for a fact they're monitoring it. I know for a fact they are. I've talked to people that have seen them on their property. There was the one case I was telling you about in Riley Township about the horses that were killed and, the other ones that were attacked in the sheep. The DNR is still on this guy's property with weapons looking for something. And they're saying, oh, it's devil worshiping. No, it's not devil worshiping because the DNR would not be getting involved and, looking for devil worshipers. So I know there's something that they know that they're not saying because of the simple fact is they don't know how to deal with it yet. And when they're able to deal with it and get their hands on it, then maybe something may come about. But there again, the normal person, you talk about werewolves, they want to sit there and laugh, and that's what they want. They want people that's going to sit there, discount it, laugh at you, and things like that. Because as long as you got people thinking that you're a nut, they're protected. Until something happens, until someone was killed. It's okay with livestock being killed, small animals and things like that, because they can sit there and say, oh, that's bear and all that other stuff. It's the same thing that would happen in Defiance, Ohio in 1972. They said it was a bear, and there was physical proof that bears were not in Ohio until 1980. Okay? And the DNR was the one that actually put that information out, that bears didn't start populating in the state of Ohio until 1980. Now, yes, and some of the bordering counties along Pennsylvania and West Virginia, yeah, they were bear sightings prior to 1980 because they were migrating from Pennsylvania to West Virginia. But since we have a large abundance of roadkill in deer population, the bears stayed because the food source is here. The food source is not worth them going back to Pennsylvania or back down to West Virginia. They stayed here. But the majority of the population of the bears are on the east side of the state. Now, yes, we've had sightings some on the west side of, a rogue bear going off on his own. But 1972, there were no bears. But they were first thing saying, this thing that was killing the pigs and killing the cows, oh, it was a bear. It was a bear. Because they wanted to sit there and to calm the people down. But when I talked to the chief's wife after his passing, she knew exactly what was going on. They knew that this was a flesh and blood entity that was doing this. But they had to sit there and come up with a story to protect the people of the town so they're not going out with a bunch of guns and somebody getting hurt.
By doing that, by making the whole topic a laughing stock, what happens to the eyewitness when someone unfortunately does see one of these things and then they come back home and try to reach out to their family members for help and they get laughed at? Yeah, that's what drives me nuts about this whole thing. I hate that aspect of it.
Yeah, it's true because I've talked to so many people. Like some of the stories I've got in my book, some of these people are in very high profile positions and they have no one to talk to because if the story got out, their job's in jeopardy. And there was one woman that I talked to and I interviewed and I have the story in my book. She was afraid to tell her family, tell her husband, tell her, family about being laughed at of what she's seen. But the thing of it is, here's my thing. I could sit there in a crowd of people say, I search for dog man, blah, 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 Bigfoot or whatever, and they may sit there and laugh and giggle, but I'm telling you what, they'll come up to you one-on-one, they're going to tell you their story or a story they knew about somebody or their father or their mother or something like that. Then they have no problem talking to you when they're one-on-one, when they're away from the crowd, and that's normally how it is. But this phenomenon is getting so big, it's like I said in the past, this is the new cryptid. This thing's getting bigger than Bigfoot. And a lot of the sightings people are getting are very credible sightings. And the thing of it is, this is aggressive. This thing shows aggressiveness towards you. Luckily no one has been killed or attacked. But just recently, I saw something posted on Facebook, an article about a guy that got attacked by a large creature, and he had scratch marks. They showed the scratch marks on this guy's face and on his body, and I believe that was the dog man that this guy was encountered with. I mean, here in Ohio, not Ohio, but Wisconsin rather. You look at some of the stories that are coming out there with these people being that close to some of these things. They're getting contact. I mean, the London, Ohio case. This thing was at the house, these people's house, trying to get into a kitchen window. So. Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be time, but like you said, we don't know if anyone has actually ever been attacked, and if they were, would it be covered up? Yeah, I think it would be. If they want the information covered up, they'll cover it up. They'll keep it quiet.
You know what, Jody? It's funny you mention that because I actually know of two people who have, in fact, been attacked by one of these things. they were not doing anything to provoke that attack. That's what's the most disconcerting aspect of the whole thing. If they had done something to provoke the dogman that attacked them, that would be one thing. The fact that they were minding their own business, didn't even know the dogman was there until the moment it made contact and initiated that attack. That, for me, is what's so disconcerting about this whole thing.
You know, my wife said, if you're out in the field by yourself, which one would you want to be attacked by, Bigfoot or Dogman? I'm like, Bigfoot. you know, seriously, because, you know, I have a 5-month-old German Shepherd, okay? He's already 80 pounds at 5 months, okay? And he's able to knock me down playing. I can just imagine that something 7 feet, 300 pounds, like my dog, what it could do to me. Knowing what my dog, when we play, he bites. He doesn't bite hard to hurt me, but he bites enough that you feel it. And I can imagine, I mean, what one of these things could actually do to you. I hate the fact one being killed to prove the existence, but something's going to happen because I know law enforcement knows about it. I know the DNR knows about it. I know the government knows about it. And I think that they find, especially the DNR, finds that this thing is probably more of a threat than a Bigfoot is.
It's funny you mentioned that, Jody, because if you think about it, I'm sure for years there's been some type of high-ranking official with the DNR, whatever type of government agency that handles issues like this, who has been worrying about trying to discredit Bigfoot sightings, and then all of a sudden these dogman encounters started coming by the way. Can you imagine how much more worried that official is going to be about squashing dogman encounters than they ever were about trying to squash the Bigfoot phenomenon?
Well, and that's true because if you look at different states, Wisconsin, their DNR people out there have files with werewolf written on it. You take the state of Maine. The state of Maine even outlawed silver bullets on the protection of werewolves. Now, was that to be funny, or was that for a particular reason? And I find that interesting, that the state of Maine, that their DNR actually did that. You know, and it's even on their, I believe it's still on their website where they talk about it. But that's odd. Okay, I mean, you sit there and think about it. In Ohio, you know, I've written under the Freedom of Information Act about Bigfoot, and they came back and said, "Oh, we have nothing. We don't have one file on Bigfoot." That's bullcrap. Okay, that's bullcrap. I mean, at least when I wrote the FBI, you know, I got 28 documents of blacked out pages, and then they sit and tell me there's, you know, 2,000 plus documents that's classified. Okay. Well, that's my next stop is to write the FBI under the Freedom of Information Act about Dogman. And I just recently, about 3 weeks ago, I wrote a letter to the ODNR on Freedom of Information Act on sightings on the Dogman in Ohio. And, you know, so I kind of got creative because I know how the government works. So I said Dogman, werewolf, you know, wolfman, large bipedal canine, large canine walking on 2 legs, you know, a large wolf-like man creature. I mean, I just went through like a whole different spill of different type of narratives. A week later, you know, they sent me a letter saying, "Thank you for your request. It's being searched through. You'll get it at an appropriate time that's allowed." And then a week later, I get a letter saying, "Your request is denied." Denied. You can't deny a Freedom of Information request unless it's stamped classified. And that was it. I mean, I'm like, are you serious? Denied? So I'm in the process of writing a letter back saying, you know, under the law, unless it's stamped classified, you can't deny giving me the request.
If they do cave and send you information like that, you know if it's something to do with Dogman or Bigfoot, you're just going to get redacted out information. You might find 2-3 words on each page if you're lucky, but they still are in total
Right. Well, it's like
control.
what the FBI did. The FBI sent me like newspaper clippings. They sent me a test result on hair samples that they did, and they sent me other people that filed requests. I mean, just sent me like 28 pages of nonsense. But here's the interesting thing about this. Each file is called a serial, like serial 1, serial 2, serial 3, all the way up to serial 10. So they sent me serial 1 through 10. But then they said serial 4 missing. Okay? And so when I wrote them back saying, well, how can serial 4 be missing? He said, well, when someone got into the files and was sterilizing the files, they probably erased the files. Well, this is a government file. Nobody's investigating why it's missing. So that tells me serial number 4 had all the information in it, and stuff. So, it comes back to the DNR. Either they've got, I even put Black Dog down because here's the thing. I know people from the DNR, okay, and they specifically told me that their code word for the dog man is Black Dog. And they got that information from the U.S. Forestry Service because that's what they use. So all departments and agencies are using the same code word. It's the same thing with law enforcement. All law enforcement across the country, along with the DNRs of each state, have a code word for Bigfoot, and it's called Black Cow. Okay, and that has been confirmed by a lot of law enforcement officers from across the country. There's a book out called The Black Cow, and it deals with law enforcement sightings on Bigfoot when they get a report, and they go and they check it out, and they call it in, and they do their file work and everything, and they stamp it as Black Cow. So I know the DNR got it, has it, and there is the Black Dog. So there's something more to it. For them to say we're just going to deny your request, no, you can't just deny my request. It's law. That's why Freedom of Information Act is there, for you to give me what I requested, unless, like I said, it's stamped classified. So either it is stamped classified or they just feel they're not going to cooperate. So that tells me that the ODNR has information on Dogman and they're keeping it quiet.
That says everything about how common these encounters are. If these agencies have a moniker like Black Dog for Dogman sightings, that tells you all you need to know about how often people are reporting these sightings into them.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. Like I said, every state knows about this. Those guys, the DNR in Maine, they all have files. Werewolf. And they put all their information in there. But, the thing of it is I don't want to get to the point where I'm keying off someone, because I got to a point where I really made the FBI upset, where they basically told me to back off with the Bigfoot stuff. When the FBI tells you to back off, you back off. The DNR, they're a government agency. I'll go to a point where I'm not going to be majorly pushing, but I'm going to use my right as a citizen under the Constitution, getting the information that I need.
Yeah, if the FBI tells you to back off, it is a good idea to comply. I can't say
because they can make your life very miserable.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll tell you how they did it, okay? This was when I was single. I wrote this Freedom of Information Act. My phone bill was real high, okay? And I was disputing it because I wasn't home when these calls were made. They're not right. I tried calling the numbers, and they're disconnected numbers, so why am I being charged for this? And I got into a fight with the phone company, and I refused to pay my bill. I was standing my ground, and I refused to pay my bill. So they cut my phone off. So I'm like, I don't care. My phone was off for about 3 days, and I get a call. My phone rings at 2:30 in the morning, literally at 2:30 in the morning, and it's the FBI. I'm talking to the guy. He was getting real aggressive at first, and then he gets real nice, and he goes, well, I'm going to tell you how to do it right. Okay? And he says, this is the way you need to do it. And that was it. And my phone's dead again. True story. Swear to God. Okay? That is how it happened. That freaked me out so bad. Literally so bad. And the guy's name was Gary Hart. Okay? And the only Gary Hart I knew at the time was the Gary Hart running for president. So that tells you how long ago this was. But I thought that was really odd. But seriously, no kidding, my phone rings at 2:30 in the morning. It was 1:30 or 2:30, something like that, in the morning, and my phone was cut off. And my phone was still cut off for like a couple of days after that. And I say, well, hey, I'm going to pay my bill. Day one, I'll pay my bill. Because that really freaked me out. It truly did. Truly did.
Yeah, I can't say I'll blame you there. Did you tell old Gary that he wasn't going to be getting your vote?
No, I was scared, man. I swear I was looking out the window. He kind of went like it said, went in and said, if you're going to write under the Freedom of Information Act about something, this is the way you need to do it. This is what you need to say, blah, 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 blah. But I never did anything after that. That was it. But he was telling me the proper way of doing it without pissing people off. Excuse my French. But I know it's a far-fetched story, but I'm telling you, it's 100% true. It's 100% true.
That would get your attention.
It got my attention. Like I said, I've never written them under the Freedom of Information Act again for anything. I'm contemplating if I'm going to do it on Dogman or not. Because I'm sure I'm on some list when they get it, bells are going off and, stuff,
And you know what? I'm sure old Gary has got you on speed dial, so yeah, be careful.
I'm sure he's been monitoring my calls and internet and all that other stuff,
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. I mean, like the thing of it is, a friend of mine, who I did UFO investigating with, this is kind of funny. I got to tell you this, but he's a spook now. Okay. And he does a lot with the CIA and stuff and things, and he won't tell you jack. I mean, he literally won't tell you jack. But this guy was like really into the UFO stuff and really into freedom of information and all this stuff. But he was just a computer whiz, and they just hired his butt because he was knowledgeable. And he said, I would tell you something. The government don't kill people anymore. He goes, they'll ruin your reputation. That's how they get you. Humiliation is worse than death.
With all their resources, it's so easy for them to do that too.
Oh yeah. It is. He says they can make you out to be a child predator. They can make you out to be a person wanting to take out an official. They can make you out to whatever they want, and they can make up all the information they need, and they're not going to be one person that's going to dispute it.
Yeah, that's true.
He said you'd be surprised if they wanted to discredit you, they would. But on the other hand, guys like me and guys like you, it's better to give us this information and spread that than it is to shut us up. So it's an odd world we live in and stuff. So I'm to the point. I really don't want to tee off any government agency. I mean, I've talked to people about certain things. I've got some very interesting stuff I know is true that I've never told anybody, and I'll probably never tell anybody until I can actually back it up and things. I've seen pictures of things and so forth, but you can't verify if it's real. When you get a picture sent to you that is so incredible, you're afraid to post it because you just don't know. I mean, I've had recently and in the past, out of nowhere, photographs of odd things being sent to me. People saying, well, this is what it is, do with it what you want. When they tell you to do with it what you want, that is the part that gets me. Some of it is Dogman related, but like I said, I won't post it. I won't put in anything because I need verification. And when people are not emailing you back and all of a sudden the email comes back undeliverable, that makes you think, am I going to get into something here? I mean, because people can Photoshop some very crazy stuff. So you got to kind of like watch what you do there. You really have to watch what information you put out.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. After some of the videos and photos and recordings that I've received and continue to receive, yeah, you've got to kind of walk on eggshells and handle it very
Yeah,
carefully.
because there's trolls out there that will deliberately make you look bad. Seriously, I mean, you know what I'm talking about, and you got to be careful. I always tell this to people. I don't care how sincere your witness is. I don't care if he cries in front of you or what. You always have to be cautious. There's that saying, don't bullcrap a bullcrap artist. Anybody can fool you at any time. We see it on the news every day with a bunch of false flag stuff. We see it, and it's thrown in our face, so it can be done, and it's the same thing with witnesses. You just don't know. Yeah, you can sit there and say, yes, it's credible, I believe them. Nothing's wrong with that. But you still have to verify and check it and verify it again.
Before we get too much later into this interview here, Jody, I know you're running short on time here. I'm sure there are a lot of listeners out there who heard you allude to that London, Ohio incident where the dog man was trying to get through that kitchen window.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people listening to the show heard that, but they're not all that knowledgeable about what happened. Could you fill us in on that?
Oh, wow. There was a family in London, Ohio, back in, I'm going to say probably 82, between 81 and 82. It was Keith and Diane Williams was the family name. They lived in a property up in London, Ohio, that was pretty much out there, kind of like how the property was in Paranormal Witness, the Wolf Pack. It was the incident was very similar to that. And what's kind of neat about that, when people see that incident on Paranormal Witness about the Wolf Pack, they get that confused with the London, Ohio case. And even if you look it up on the internet, you'll notice that there's a lot of confusion because it was a very similar type case. The husband was gone, the wife was home with their children, and she's at the sink doing dishes, and she sees this large canine with piercing eyes looking into the window. And, you know, the window was probably about 7 or 8 feet off of the ground, and this thing was at eye level to her. And it was trying to get into the house, it was trying to get in through the door, trying to get in through the window. She's terrified. She's terrified for her children, but luckily it did not get into the house. You know, when she first saw it, she thought it might have been a stray dog, you know, or something, but then she realized, well, this thing is standing on 2 legs looking directly at her. Like I said, it was about 7 or 8 feet from the outside the window to where the sink was. So it was a very terrifying story. It actually made the newspaper, actually made the news. They moved immediately from there because they have had quite a few incidents at that property. The husband kept always saying it was a stray dog. It was a stray dog trying to get in. It's not no monster and stuff. She said, I mean, this thing had dark, piercing eyes. When it was looking at her, it was snarling at her. She was terrified. She knew exactly what it was. I mean, this thing was trying to turn the doorknob. So it had possibly human-styled hands trying to get in. She saw it very clearly, what it was. So,
Can you imagine what it must have been like for her?
oh, I can imagine. Very terrifying. Very terrifying. It goes back to that whole thing. That is I think the nightmare of everyone is that creature. I'm 52, 20 years in the Army. I've been in combat in Iraq, and I can watch something dealing with the dog man, and I can go outside, take the garbage out, and I still kind of get, you know, because this thing can get you. It can actually hold on to you. You know, it's got, you know, this thing probably has hands like a raccoon, and it's able to get a hold of you, and that's what's terrifying, because this is something that can hurt you, do some serious damage to you.
Yeah, just imagine that. For anyone who's been bitten by a large dog, think about what it would be like to have something like that grab onto you with those big clawed fingers, having it start biting you. That would just be absolutely horrible.
What's even worse that if it didn't kill you when it bit you, that just the bacteria into your bloodstream, because you don't know what type of animal this is, if it has rabies or distempered or what, just the bacteria that it gets from eating other animals, especially if it's eating roadkill, the bacteria just getting in your body would be enough to kill you. That's the terrifying part, I think, because that's what you have to deal with. I mean, it's like anybody will tell you, like, a human bite's worse than a dog bite. But, an animal like that, and, the amount of bacteria that it's in contact with is frightening alone.
Well, I know you've got to run, Jody. I can't thank you enough for coming back on.
Anytime, buddy. Anytime.
I really do appreciate it. Well, yeah, thanks again so much. I really appreciate it, and you have yourself a great night.
All right, buddy. You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you. Episode 62. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Our guest tonight is Paul Sinclair. Paul, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much, Vic, and it's a pleasure to be here and be able to speak to you.
Oh, it's great to have you. Paul, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, as you already know, Vic, I'm aged 52 years old, and I live here in the UK in a small fishing town called Bridlington. I'm a married man, married for 33 years. I have 4 girls. I've always been an outdoor type of person. Spent lots of my youth around farms and been brought up in villages around small communities. Always had an outdoor kind of interesting kind of person. That's the way I am. The place we're talking about tonight, Flixton, is 9 miles from where I live. I live on the edge of the North Sea at Bridlington, as I said, which is a coastal community. I'm a joiner by trade, so obviously it's all hands-on with me. Unlike most of the people you interview, I'm not into hunting as such because we don't have access to guns and huge expanses of land to hunt on here in the UK like you do where you are, but nevertheless, I would think I'm quite an outdoor kind of man. I hope that tells you a little bit about me.
It sure does. That's a good bio. Since you're here to talk about the Flixton werewolf, Paul, please set the table by telling us about the village of Flixton.
Yeah, well, it's a very, very small village, is Flixton. Its neighbour village is Folkton. You could hardly tell the two apart. You have the signpost coming into Flixton. On the opposite side of the signpost, you've got the name of Folkton. That's how close they are. And if they were merged, it would still be a small village. It's a very small community. Very old, probably one of the oldest villages in England, if truth be known. Well, it is. It has lots and lots of ancient historic features, including Flixton Star Car, which is a Mesolithic site of great archaeological importance. The villages around it are equally as interesting, really. 4 miles away, you've got the village of Hunmanby, which we might come to later in the story because it does feature. Just out of Flixton, you've got another village called Staxton. So initially, you've got Folkton at one end, Flixton in the middle, Staxton, and then a little further, you've got a small village called Binnington. So all these small communities, which would have been even smaller many years ago, are in very close proximity. And below Flixton, you've got another slightly larger than a village called Seamer, and that is in the valley of the Flixton Star Car, which are the Car meaning wetlands. If none of you, anybody didn't know that, so that's a rough idea of the area.
It does sound like an area that's very rich in history. I can only imagine how far back that goes. Before I have you share all of these encounters people in the area have had, stretching way back with the werewolf of Flixton, I want to ask you, in the pre-interview you mentioned that the forests in that area are very scary looking. Could you tell us why they look so scary? What is it about the forests in that area that are so frightening?
Well, I suppose until I actually started looking into the accounts of the Flixton werewolf, I'd never really looked into these areas of woodland. The particular area of Flixton and Staxton, which is called Flixton Wold and Staxton Wold. I feel now I need to explain what the wolds are. A wold is an area of predominantly chalkland that is covered in grass for grazing cattle, woodland, and then further up towards the north we've got the moors. But that is a wold. Well, Flixton Wold and Staxton Wold are on particularly steep elevations. So the woodland around that area is, it's quite dense woodland, but because it's on such an angle, probably 45-degree angle, the trees are quite mature and tall, even though they're growing in what is not ideal fertile soil, because it's predominantly chalk. The roots are on the surface. So you've got these quite large trees that are growing on a 45-degree angle with roots that look like snakes wriggling down along the woodland. It's quite eerie, especially as it gets a little bit darker. I know that only adds to the flavour of the place and probably adds to the stories that I'm telling. But it's not a nice feeling, actually, when you get up there late on or after dark. And maybe I'm a bit foolhardy for going up there after dark, but there you go.
It sounds like it would be a pretty creepy place to go to after the sun goes down. For anyone that's wondering what this place looks like, Paul is going to send me some pictures that I'm going to post on the YouTube version of the show. If you want to get an idea of what the area looks like, check out the YouTube version of the show and you'll be able to see. Moving forward, Paul, you've got a number of encounters to tell us about that have occurred in that area. If you don't mind, please start with the earliest one and take it forward from there.
Okay then, Vic. There's a number of encounters that obviously I've not personally looked into. I mean, I'd have had to be about 500 or 600 years old to look into them, bearing in mind that this story goes back to the 10th century. So it's a very old story, the accounts of the Flixton werewolf. But in the 16th century, there is an account of it attacking a coach and horses. Skeptics have tried to discredit this by saying it would have just been a wolf. And it could well be true, but it's one lone animal that's said to have attacked a coach and horses and its occupants inside. So I can't verify whether there's truth in that. Obviously, anyone listening to me would understand that, but that is an early account. Other accounts follow throughout the years, right up to present day. Now, I've spoken to people in Flixton and Folkton, because we have to consider Folkton because it's so close, about this alleged Flixton werewolf. Maybe the word alleged I shouldn't use, because I actually believe that this thing is real. I really do, whether it's flesh and blood or something else. I actually believe it's real. I have no reason to believe that the people who've told me these things have any other reason to tell me than just to get these things off their chest. Before I go into the accounts, Vic, I perhaps ought to say that one of the men who told me two of the accounts lives in Flixton. Well, I spoke to him a few years ago, and he said he knew nothing about this story. As I looked into it and found out more information and sort of dug and looked deeper, I don't want to go too much into the history of it, but one day I spoke to this guy, probably after a 6-month period, and I told him I found out that Flixton used to be known as Wolfland, which is true. It can be there, it can be found, so it's not just my word, it's not just relaying a message, it's actually true. So once he knew I found this out and he knew I were digging, he told me that he did know of the stories, and that his father knew of them, and his grandfather knew them, and his grandfather before that. What he actually said was, if you've lived in Flixton for 40 years, you are not a local. He said his family personally went back over 5 generations. That is how deep this story goes, and trying to get accounts. It's took me years to get these few accounts out of people. He thinks that there was between 5 and 10 people that would actually be able to tell me about the Flixton werewolf. They just called it the beast, to be honest. They didn't call it the Flixton werewolf. I think that's been added by writers from the UK over the last probably 10 to 20 years. However, he's quite confident in his mind, at 78 years of age, that this thing exists in whatever way, shape or form it is. It is real, and I actually believe him. But it's took me so long to get these bits of information out of these people. So, Vic, would you like me to tell you about the first account that I've got?
Please do.
Okay, right. Well, once again, people listening, these are historic accounts, and this one goes back to 1948, approximately. On top of Flixton Wold, there is a series of large round barrows. It's an ancient barrow cemetery, burial mounds. That's what a barrow is, or what we term as a barrow. And there's 7, and they're called Sharp How. Now, this chap told me that as a young boy, I'm not going to say his name, but he's now 78, so I think you can derive who's told me. And he was aged 11, or around that age. He was at Sharp How one late summer with another boy. He said they could do what they wanted. Basically, the farming folk, and none of the dangers of letting your children out playing. Well, we say that, and we're talking about the Flixton werewolf. But in them days, none what we'd associate anyway. So they're up at Sharp How, and they're just doing what young boys do, just playing as you do, and they noticed there's a large tree growing out of the side of Sharp How, or one of the burial mounds. And there's this thing crouched on its haunches with its back to the tree. And they're looking at it, trying to decipher just what it is. They don't know. It's hairy. It's muscular. It's the size of a man, if not larger, because I did ask its size, and they thought it were like a big man. So I'm not going to say it were 8 foot tall, because this thing's on its haunches, and they didn't know, really, and the young boys. They said it was looking at something in its hands. Now, he didn't say it had hands like a man. He said it had fingers, and it was studying something. Whatever it was studying was in both hands, and its head was down, looking at it. And as they're observing this, with ears like a dog as well, by the way, its head just slowly lifted and looked at them. They were horrified. This, they described, was a man covered in hair with a dog's head. And it wasn't night time. It didn't display any glowing red eyes. It terrified them. They turned and they ran. They never looked back. It didn't chase them. It didn't growl at them, or they felt overcome with fear, as I should imagine anybody would. But that is his story that he relayed to me, and that took me a few years to get out of him. I'd like to move forward to approximately 1967. What we've got here, I live in Bridlington, which is, as I've previously discussed, a small seaside town fishing community. Just down the coast from me, probably 9 miles, is another village, another fishing community called Filey. And that runs parallel, if you went inland, to Flixton. Now these two chaps in 1967 had been for a night out in Filey, as most young men would probably do in any town, any place in the world. They're coming home late at night. I don't have a time, but it's late. I don't have a month even. It's late at night, and they're on, this road features in many of the accounts, they're on the A1039. And they're on a motorbike, so obviously one riding, one pillion. And what they saw on the A1039 entering the village of Flixton, in the bottom of a dike, just sort of coming out of the dike, is, I would imagine, I mean, we're on talking about dogmen, but in them days they never talked that kind of language or that terminology, but that's what they saw. It had glowing red eyes, it was full of hair, and it was a man coming out of the dike with a dog's head. We don't have wolves in the UK. We don't have bears in the UK. We have deer. They tell me that this, for all intents and purposes, was a man with a dog's head, covered in hair, muscly. Didn't attack them, once again, didn't attack them. It was coming out of the dike. As they approached it, they caught it in the headlights and they saw it. Now, they'd stuck to that story. Old men. I'm 52, so not young, but much older than me. They've held on to that story, and once again, Vic, I can find no reason, really. They could be lying, but why would they? I mean, why would anybody come out with this stuff? You know, I mean, I just don't understand it. There's got to be some kind of truth into these accounts that you're being told and the ones that I'm telling you now. So then, if we can end with that one, I'm sorry these accounts are short, listeners, but it's been difficult getting these. Below Flixton is an area of flat land called Seamer, and it's just past the Flixton Cars. If I haven't already told you, the car means area of wetland, reeds and elder. Flixton Star Car, the archaeological site. So we've got a farmer who was working on the cars. He'd been to tend to his livestock and he's coming home after a day's work. It's no good me trying to say what he's been doing, because once again, I've got this story. There's a lot of drainage ditches on the Flixton Cars, because, like we've said, it is wetland. And he's walking along what's known as the Seamer Drain. And as he's walking along, he arrives at a gate which is quite tall. It's night time. There's a sneck or a latch at the top of the gate, and he has to reach over or put his hand high to release this latch. And when he does, he swears that a clawed hand, not paw, a clawed hand, fingers hairy with claws, clasped over the top of his hand as he tried to get the gate undone, which terrified him. He didn't see a dog man, he didn't see a wolf man, he didn't see anything apart from that, nothing else. So that is the only sort of information I've got on that account, and I was told that account by a chap who used to work at the Flixton sawmill, who's quite knowledgeable, to be honest with you. We'll probably touch on that in a minute.
Before you do move on with any of the other encounters, I want to make a point here, Paul. A man's word meant everything back then. If you didn't have a good reputation for honesty and character back then you really didn't have anything. People were much less likely to tell lies like that for fear of damaging that rep.
This is very true, Vic, and I actually believe that this is part of the reason these stories have remained hidden for so long. If I can just sort of move away from Flixton Werewolf for a moment, my main interest is UFOs and other unexplained things, big cats, things of that nature. And I look quite deep into these things, and it's whilst looking into these that the Flixton Werewolf story kept cropping up. Whilst doing a bit of research, I decided I would have a look into this. I actually thought that I wouldn't be looking into it long. I don't mean to disrespect anybody who's previously spoken to you, because full credit to them, there's some fabulous accounts, but I actually didn't think that I'd be finding much, but I'm absolutely amazed by what I've found. So if I could move on to this other account, Vic, is that okay?
Please do.
Yeah, well, what we've got then is an account from the 1970s. Now, I'd like to stress that this one is not my own. It's a lot of people's, because it's featured in quite a lot of books, but it seems unfair not to put it in amongst these. And this report is of a huge dog-like man attacking a timber wagon, once again, on the A1039 road. It's supposed to have left physical marks on the timber wagon and left the driver absolutely terrified. I can only find the information on the internet, and it is in one book that I've managed to purchase. However, to support this, the people in Flixton and Fulton that I've spoke to who've been willing to talk about the Flixton Werewolf do remember it, which sort of adds a little more weight to the story. It perhaps would have been better if at the time that had come forward and said, but that is the nature of these unusual accounts and encounters. So, as I say, that is in the 1970s. It's reported to be attacking a timber wagon. So, once again, I find myself thinking, what is this thing? Is it flesh and blood? And I'm questioning it because I've listened to your reports, Vic, and the good people that have given accounts to you say that they've shot at this creature and it's had no impact on them. So I'm thinking, is it some kind of apparition, shape-shifting creature, or I don't really know. I'm thinking it can't be flesh and blood, but then I contradict myself because it's attacked a timber wagon and left traces. So I don't know what we're dealing with. So if I can move from there, we've got another account then, once again, of a huge wolf-like creature with glowing red eyes. This one's one of my own that I've managed to get, that was seen chasing terrified cows across a field just out of Flixton and Staxton in the village of Binnington. Now, they said it had red eyes and glowing red eyes, but it was seen in daylight. So I'm not sure how that works, but I'm not sure how any of this works. And who are we to sort of say it can't? I mean, things are happening with these things that are just beyond our comprehension, I feel. Now, there's no reports of this creature actually killing the cows. It chased them into a ditch or a ravine, and I'm told that they had to be destroyed. The cows died as a result of it. Now, that was in the 1970s. Two people have told me about this. One of them told me about it, who actually was a schoolboy at the time. I know things can run wild in school children's minds, but one of them was a grown man, one was a schoolboy, and the schoolboy said that's what all they talked about in their small school for a few weeks. But if we can move on from there, there's another account of a group of young boys who were playing around Flixton and Staxton Wold, and they saw on the edge of the woods what they described as a very, very large black dog. But they couldn't decide, they couldn't sort of work out what it was. They watched it for quite a while, and one of the boys ran to his auntie's and got some binoculars, and it was still there. And they couldn't work out whether it had got a cat's head or a dog's head, and they called it a dog cat. Now, this is 1985. I probably didn't say that, so I apologise. So that is all I've got of that creature. It sounds very peculiar, but once again, what isn't peculiar about this Flixton werewolf sightings and accounts, and what you're seeing at your end of the world, Vic?
Yeah, everything about this topic is very hard to figure, but When you mentioned earlier about the hunters who had shot one of these things without any effects that you would expect to see, Larry Parker mentioned shooting one in the chest with a 30-06 in episode 21, I believe. Yeah, episode 21. It didn't drop like you would expect it to drop if anything that size got hit center mass by a 30-06 bullet. There are so many things they do that are hard to figure that it's hard to say anything about them with certainty.
This is true, Vic, and I've listened to lots of the accounts that these good people have shared with you on your station now. It's captured me. I've become intrigued with it, to be honest with you, and I don't know what we're dealing with. I mean, could it be actually interdimensional? If that's not too hard for your listeners to get their heads around, and I'm not trying to be patronising, but, you know, I sometimes think, after we've explored all the logical answers, then sometimes we have to actually consider the illogical. People at your side of the world have access to guns and lots of sort of different ammo, and they know what they're doing, and when it comes to hunting, they can sort of weigh their prey up and the size and what they would need to bring that animal down. And bullets are having no effect on this. So, or in many cases, should I say, I can't say in all cases, in many cases having no effect on this. So it's definitely something different to the norm. So even if it is in our physical as we see it, it's a difficult one. I'm struggling to even find the words to say what I want to say, Vic.
Oh, I can relate. It's really hard to put a finger on a lot of the things they do.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, I do have another account, Vic, from 2013. And once again, the road, the A1039 features. Now, before I go into it, the A1039 road is nothing exotic. It just runs parallel with all of these villages. Staxton, Flixton, it takes you to Hummonby, it takes you to Filey, where them guys who encountered the werewolf coming home from a night out. And to the right of the road, you look up onto Flixton Wold, Staxton Wold, all the heavily wooded areas where this thing, let's assume it's flesh and blood, where this thing must spend quite a bit of time. Although many areas around North and East Yorkshire are so unpopulated that it wouldn't really have to touch population to move from one area to another. So this account took place in 2013, and it involved a man walking two dogs towards Flixton Wold. Flixton and Staxton Wold, the two merge. He's walking his two dogs, which are quite sharp and alert, and he tells me that they love to chase pheasants and rabbits and basically do what dogs do, and they'll chase after anything. The dogs became aware of something high up on the hillside, about 400 yards away. What we'd got is, I don't know, a 12 to 18 inch grass and grazing for sheep. And then 400 yards away, 3-bar wooden fence, and Flixton and Staxton Wold beyond that. And his dogs, they froze rigid and they fixed their eyes on something further up the hill. What he couldn't understand was, he didn't think the dogs would have been able to see it due to the height of the grass. So he's not sure if they sensed it or saw it. I thought I'd just throw that in because it might be interesting to some people. I don't know. But when he looks, he can see what he thought was a small pony on the edge of the forest on his side of the 3-bar fence. He's observing it and trying to work out what it is, and he's confused. His dogs don't want to go and investigate because that's the kind of thing that they liked to do. The next thing he knows, to his horror, it's got up on two legs and it's running down the field towards him, and it's a dog. Or what do we describe it as? It's a man with a dog's head running down the field towards him. He's horrified. He sort of drags his dogs on the leads. Well, I'm assuming they're on the leads. That's something I never asked. But he gets himself and the dogs out of the single track road that leads up to Flixton Wold onto the road, which is the A1039. And as he's doing that, a car comes down the road. This is early morning, but it's not dark. And he doesn't know whether the car stopped it, or whether it just decided to stop by itself, but it just turned in a circle and went back up into the woods and disappeared. Now, that is all I know about that story. I can tell you that it's very close to what is known as Spittal Farm. There's a stream running close to it, Spittal Brook as it's known as, and Spittal Farm houses stands on what was once a refuge to protect travellers in the 10th century. We might touch on that later, if not, I'll speak to Vic about it when he wants to. If I can move on from that and take us to April 2014, we have to come 9 to 10 miles away from Flixton to a location called Danes Dyke near Flamborough and Bempton. Danes Dyke is an interesting place in itself. It's an ancient earthworks where the Vikings are said to have tried to cut off the mainland from what would be Bridlington, where I live, and Flamborough, and separate it. Whether that's what happened in ancient history, I suppose we'll never know. But it's a huge ancient earthwork. It's got many stories attached to it, and probably equally as interesting as this, but this is a werewolf account from Danes Dyke at April 2014. Now, what happened there is this chap had been working on nights at a nearby industrial site at a place called Bessingby, just out of Bridlington. I don't know whether he was a regular shift worker, but he was coming home on night, probably alternated his shifts. But this particular night, Danes Dyke's in a hollow, I need to say that. He approached the hollow of Danes Dyke. It's a single track road that leads you into Flamborough and then on to Bempton. And as he approached the hollow and sort of his car just dipped into the hollow, his headlights caught the glint of eyes. And I think he thought it were a deer, because Danes Dyke, we do have roe deer and we've got muntjac deer. If I pronounced that wrong, I apologise. It'd be about 200 yards down into the bottom of the hollow. So as he's driving down in between 3 and 3:30 in the morning, to his horror, on the right-hand side, crouched on all fours, is what he described as the creature from the American Werewolf in London. Now, I've not personally seen that film, so I was told that it was like it was when it was on the carpet. So anyone who's seen it, they'll have to... You can see it, I can't, and that is the truth. I've not seen the film. He says it was horrifying. It didn't attack him or attack the car, it was just looking, and it was on all fours. He says it was just horrifying. He continued home to Flamborough. His usual night entrance into the home consisted of sort of, I don't know, coming home, maybe having a drink, tea, coffee, and then getting ready and going to bed. But on this evening, he woke his wife up, frightened, having to tell his wife about what he'd seen, told her what it looked like, which is what I've just described to you, and basically that is the story. And now I'm never going to get any more about that out of these people. I just know I'm not, because that's end of it. I know it is. They don't want to talk about it, and maybe that's what you're talking about, Vic, when somebody's seen something like this and it has such a profound effect on them that it's maybe a bit foolhardy to find yourself on Flixton Wold, which is what I've done, I'll not deny it, in the night, looking for such things.
Well, I'm glad you have an appreciation for the risk that you're putting yourself in. Once you have a close-up and personal with one of these things, you'll definitely never be the same after it. Are you aware of the fact that all over the UK, other people are reporting having dogman encounters? This isn't a phenomenon that's just local to the Flixton area.
Vic, I have to tell you, no, I'm not. Not at all. In a way, I don't mean I'm pleased, but it's enlightening, let's put it that way. Like I said to you before, my subject is UFOs, and I got into this, if I can tell you without hijacking your question, because I'm researching for a book, which I'm going to call The Truth That Leaves No Proof. It's about strange events around Bempton and Flamborough, within a 25-mile radius. Obviously, Flixton comes into that 25-mile radius. When I actually started researching the big cats, because there's quite a lot seen, and as you will be aware, we have no native big cats in this country, I started finding little stories or discovering little stories about this Flixton werewolf. And I'll be quite honest, I really didn't think it would go very far. But the deeper I looked, the more I found. It's almost like looking down a tree with all the branches, with little bits shooting off in all directions. Everywhere's dark, but there's a little grain of truth in everything. So yeah, enlighten me, Vic, because I am interested.
You had said certain things that left me with the impression that you thought that that was basically only happening in that area, but no, in fact, like I said earlier, there are people all over the UK who are reporting encounters with these things. Here's an interesting tidbit for you. You said that you haven't seen An American Werewolf in London. That film was released in '81. There's a pub at the start of that movie called The Silent Lamb, where two hitchhikers/sightseeing tourists go for a beer after a long day's walk. This Silent Lamb pub is supposed to be right on the edge of the moors. The location for that pub was actually in the Black Mountains. What's ironic about all this is, to this day, people are reporting seeing dogman-like creatures in the Black Mountains. So, yeah, if you didn't know that, I figured that would be an interesting tidbit for you.
It's very interesting, and the fact that you're telling me that there's lots more people reporting these things here in the UK. I've listened to quite a few of your radio interviews, and I have listened to a few people in the UK, and the guy from Scotland who saw the creature as a young boy looking at him from round a tree. Amazing, but I must be naive. I didn't realise that there were so many people in the UK looking into it, but probably that is part due to the fact that it's only sort of a side subject to what I'm really researching, Vic, you know, but nevertheless, this thing, I really do throw full respect to your listeners, because I might be saying things they don't want to hear. This thing, be it flesh and blood or something else, is real.
I'm not surprised that all these encounters have happened over in the UK and you didn't know about them. If you think people over here on this side of the pond are reluctant to talk about their encounters publicly, it's even harder to find anyone on that side of the pond who is interested in coming out publicly and sharing it.
This is very true, Vic. If we can just go back to the encounter that the two young boys had on Sharp How, you know, the ancient burial mounds. They were 11-year-old boys. I suppose they've told other people about, he has, the other one's died, I've got to say, told other people, or they told other people about what they saw as 11-year-old boys and throughout that time. But they never ever went public with it, and I think going public would be telling somebody who they would consider as an outsider like myself. Now, I've got respect, and I will not give any names away. It's such a small place, and it wouldn't be fair. But that took these men in the 70s and 80s all that time to share that little bit of a story with me. When they've gone, that's the end of it. I mean, I hope there's a few more stories of the Flixton werewolf, but, well, I've got one now, actually, from last month, but I'm on about the historic ones. When these people, these men and women have passed away, that is the last we're going to get of these stories. That's why I think it's so important to document them, even though they are historic. I realise that at your side of the world, you've got people seeing these things on a much more regular basis. But bear in mind, we're in a country the size of a postage stamp compared to yourselves, and the areas of land that people have got to look in and these creatures have got to lose themselves in is vast compared to what we've got. I mean, I don't know what we're dealing with here. If it's a living, breathing thing, then we must be dealing with some kind of population, but where would it live? It must be a small population, I feel. My gut feeling is, and I do believe these things, regardless of whether other people don't, is that we're dealing with something that isn't flesh and blood. It may have the ability to enter our reality or our sphere of reality from time to time and even be physical. But I don't think it's always in our reality. Like I said previously, that might be a step too far for some people and they might think I'm a bit wacko. But once again, if we've explored all the rational possibilities and we're left with the irrational, then it has to be considered. That is the only thing in my defence when discussing this creature, because full respect to your people and the people that have seen it in this country, it's real. I just don't know what it is. So, if you want, Vic, I'll move to this last account that I've got from last month.
Please do.
Okay, well, this account sort of confirmed everything that everyone's told me simply because I know the person that's seen it. This is what makes it so uncanny. I'm not going to say who it is, but I know them, and they wouldn't make a story up to impress Paul Sinclair, I assure you. Now, this lady is 33 years old. She's married, and she's got 2 children. And last month, I think it was on the blue moon. And now, I'm sure many of your listeners will know what a blue moon is, and I think it's when you have 2 full moons in the same month. If I'm wrong, someone please correct me. But it was on the blue moon, and they were travelling home from York, here in the UK. They'd had a day's shopping. They've got 2 young children, 8-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl, and they were travelling back home from York. They took the children to see some film at cinema last off, and then they were on the way back. Approximately 11 p.m, they're on, once again, the A1039. I know I have to keep saying this road, but I suppose it features in many of the accounts. And they're travelling down A1039. They've just passed Staxton to their right. The top of Staxton Wold, before we go into this story, I need to tell you that is RAF Staxton Wold, which is the oldest operational RAF base in the world. It's fully manned and still fully operational. It plays a major part in UK's and America's defence, I would have thought. But so they've just passed Staxton and they're approaching Flixton. And they're approaching the roundabout, which on the left-hand side sits Spittal Farm, where the refuge was built to protect travellers in the 10th century. The roundabout is quite large. It's got large mature sycamore trees growing in the centre of it. I think it's got about 11 mature sycamore trees, tall grass and ferns growing around it. As they're approaching this island, and it's lit up, bear in mind, but they're approaching the little village of Flixton, and there's not a lot of traffic on road, in fact, nothing. This lady sees something on the island in between, like an arrowed direction sign, and to the right of it, a sign that tells you the location of an area. And there's a good, 15 foot in between them signs, and I know there is because we've sort of done his homework and looked at it, and this sign is over 4 foot tall, the arrowed sign. And she becomes aware, she gets a full side view of a large, huge, dark coloured, she says it was a dog, but we're talking pony-sized dog. They have a female Alsatian. It's your average-sized Alsatian dog. She says it was 4 times bigger than Dell. It was huge. The children were asleep in the back of the car. She said she was speechless, absolutely didn't know what to say. She knew immediately that she'd seen what I'd been talking about and looking into. She's watching it and looking at it. She's got a full side view of this thing, and it was slightly taller at the shoulder than it was at the back, sort of hyena-like, if that sort of makes sense, but it had a very long curving tail, a shaggy curving tail that went down to the ground, and a long snout. She said it was muscular, with a deep rib cage, like a greyhound's rib cage, but more muscular, and even though it had got shaggy fur, she could tell it was very muscular. She just looked at it as they went round the roundabout and onto the road that would lead them to their house at Caton. Caton's just outside of Flixton, Seamer and Falkton. That's another little village. She immediately said to her husband, "Stop the car." She sort of gathered her senses. He asked her what the problem was. She says, "Are the doors locked?" He said they were. I'm sorry if I sound boring with this conversation, listeners, but I can only tell you what I've been told. She said, "I think I've just seen," and she said, "what I've been talking about," and he sort of chuckled. He thought she was joking. Anyway, a few seconds later he realised that she weren't joking, and they were back on the road, and they did a few circuits of the roundabout to see whether they could see this thing, and there was nothing. Now, I've listened to all the stories of the Flixton werewolf over the years. I've interviewed quite a few people about it during my sort of bits of research. I've had no reason to disbelieve any of the people, but this lady, I know, is telling the truth. We have since spent a bit of time with other people as well, a group of us, on Flixton Wold. Now, after listening to Vic's interviews with various other people. I think we've probably been a bit foolhardy. I mean, although there's been no reported deaths that I know of here in the UK, I mean, Vic might correct me, I still think that on reflection we've been a little bit silly entering Flixton Wold in the night. I go up there with cameras, I go all over. A lot of local farmers know me due to my interest in UFOs and they'll contact me if anything's been seen. So that's part of the reason we go up there. But on reflection, I think I need to rethink this. So that was the last account, Vic, that I've got, and I hope somebody's maybe found it interesting.
Oh, I can't see how they could not. Is that eyewitness the one who seemingly had the strongest reaction when recounting that encounter to you?
Without a doubt. Apart from, perhaps, the dog walker. The dog walker was shook up by the thing that got up on two legs and ran down the field towards him.
Well, that's totally expected. If you encounter something like that, especially something that looks that way that runs straight towards you, I can't see how that wouldn't affect you that way.
What is interesting, Vic, which I've probably never touched on, but I'll try and post some pictures to you, Vic, so that people can get an idea of what I'm on about. Where the dog walker was is perhaps, let me just get my facts, 200 yards from that roundabout. He was approaching Flixton Wold and Staxton Wold, and he'd have been going on a single-track road at the other side of the road 200 yards up from that roundabout. And the roundabout, as I spoke before, is on the corner where the farmhouse stands now, that stands on the ruins of the building that was built originally for protection of travellers in the 10th century.
I know you're pressed for time tonight. It is late over on your side of the pond. I am looking forward to having you back next week. I already asked Paul about that, and he agreed to come back to talk about some more very interesting topics. But while I've got you here tonight, before we close the show out, I've got a couple more questions for you, Paul. The first one would be, how do locals who haven't seen it in that area view the phenomenon?
I get a mixed reaction. When I first went to Flixton and Folkestone, the two are inseparable, they're that close together. Most of the locals just looked at me as though I were an alien. One guy that I spoke to was working on the old blacksmith shop for his son. He was restoring the property, seen me and my wife actually walking around the village, and sort of, I don't know, he maybe took an interest in us and ended up speaking. And I told him what I was researching. He laughed openly in my face. Not sarcastically, it just come as such a shock to him. And then he said to me, but I do know a guy that might know about this. Now that same man, Vic, first of all, we went to this chap's house, and he sort of knocked on the door, opened it, shouted his name. We all entered this guy's house, and he wasn't in. That's what this place is like. I don't want to open it up to burglars, but I mean, I couldn't believe it myself. Oh, he's not home. I later got to speak to him, and he'd never heard of the Flixton werewolf, and which were fine. And as I told you before, at the very beginning of the story, that guy he'd never heard of it. Then when I continued to dig, and they realised that I weren't just somebody who believed in werewolves depicted in films and silver bullets and the full moon rising and people changing into werewolves, I pointed a few things out to him that I'd found out about the area historically. He opened up and told me that, sure enough, he had heard of the Flixton werewolf. He did know the stories. His father knew the stories, his grandfather knew the stories, and his relatives before them knew the stories. So that's how hard it is and how deep this story runs. Now, people outside of these villages, in the town of Scarborough, because I've been to their archives at the library, that's quite a bit larger place, they've heard of the stories. But I think that's probably because they have featured in folklore accounts and books from time to time over the years. Odd accounts like the one of it attacking the timber wagon have featured in books throughout the years, and there's a few researchers in this country who've written about the Flixton werewolf. Without being disrespectful to them, I'm not sure they've ever even been to Flixton. I think most of what everybody's written in the past has just been a copy and paste exercise, which isn't really fair, and it doesn't do the story justice. I mean, as hard as this story is to swallow, and as hard as people find it to believe that these things are real, if we're going to have people who are supposed to be credited as being the top researchers of this kind of subject in this country and in your country, then at least get off your backsides and actually get to the locations and look into it. I mean, I'm pretty limited. I'm not travelling all over the UK. I've got this on my doorstep and I'm looking into it. People don't have to believe me, but what I'm telling you is my truth and what I've been told. But as for the other researchers, I'm pretty sure they've never even been to Flixton. I think it's just been a copy and paste exercise, Vic.
Finding information on the Flixton werewolf is very difficult to do. You mentioned how hard it is to get info from people around there on the Flixton werewolf, so I guess I shouldn't be all that surprised that it is so hard to find info, but after having looked into it, I have got no doubts whatsoever that you are, in fact, the foremost authority on the Flixton werewolf. You're a modest man, so you're probably going to disagree with that, but that's how I see it.
Well, thank you very much. To be honest, Vic, I never expected to be sat here talking about this. I must admit, I really did not. It's cropped up, and I genuinely thought that after a few pages I would be putting an end to the Flixton werewolf, because we have so many big cat sightings around this area also. Large black cats, and we've even had lioness sightings. How that figures, I've just no idea, but the Flixton werewolf kept cropping up, so I started looking into it, and I'm not going to let it go, Vic, to be honest with you. I'm intrigued. I'm absolutely intrigued. Now, I just hope that the other people that you interview and speak to realise that I am taking it seriously. I'm not trying to be sort of disrespectful to anybody, because I realise that there's some really, really good men in the field who you've spoken to, who know their field craft. I can say I've grown up around farms, but we're in the UK. We don't have that kind of lifestyle and that kind of culture, so it is pretty new to me. But all I can do is keep digging.
Well, I'd say the information that you've amassed is nothing less than impressive, to say the least. It's got to be so hard to try and get information on a topic like this when you're stonewalled by so many people because of the topic like this, but I think it's very impressive, like I said, all the info that you've turned up.
Well, Vic, the topic of UFOs is still sort of looked upon, and people snigger and give you sort of rolled eyes. And I mean, just this Sunday, I don't want to sidetrack too much, but I went to see Stanton Friedman, who some of your listeners will have heard of and know of, the nuclear physicist who spoke of UFOs for a very long time. And I went to see him personally with another chap this Sunday in the UK. When you've got such credible people talking about an unusual subject like UFOs, and the general public still don't sit up and listen, what chance have you got with this, the stories of the Flixton werewolf here in the UK? It's very difficult, Vic.
Oh, I can only imagine. I guess it's not that much of a stretch to say whereas Bigfoot is our national cryptid, it kind of seems almost like werewolves, i.e. dogmen, are yours.
Perhaps you're right. I mean, once again, Vic, it's a fairly new one on me. I've been looking at it for probably 4 years. The history of the area, if we touch on it, I've looked into that, but to gather these accounts, and it's took this long, is quite a task, and I'm sure there's many more out there. I'm absolutely certain there's more out there, but as I say, all I can do, Vic, is keep digging. Hopefully, after listening to this, I mean, maybe somebody from UK in and around this area might contact you. That would be a plus.
If they do, and if they're willing to have me pass their info on to you so that the two of you can talk about whatever they've got going on, I'd be more than happy to do that. As you've been talking about your research, in fact, I've been kicking around the idea of this particular eyewitness or that particular eyewitness in the UK, possibly putting you into contact with them. I'll reach out to these people that I've got in mind right now, see what they think about that, and take it from there.
Wonderful.
I'd normally ask you to give any closing comments you have, but since you're going to be back for next week's show, I'm just going to go ahead and thank you for coming on the show here and wish you a good night.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure. Thank you, Vic.
Thanks again so much, and I'll talk to you next week.
You're welcome.
Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, You can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love